Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today we're working on a little something inspired by a major something happening in real life right now. Now, in case you somehow missed it, Australia has been having to deal with some pretty significant wildfires recently. The devastation has affected not only the people of Australia, but also the plant life and animal life as well. So before we go any further, if you have the means, please consider donating to one of the organizations helping out Australia in their time of need. I provided links to just a few of the many that could use your donations and support in the description below. So today's project was inspired by a few clips online of the wildfire's destruction in action, specifically clips of the rescued wildlife, which most seem to be of koalas, who were literally catching on fire. It was horrific, but I thought it'd make for a good catalyst to spread awareness for a good cause. And I also need to preface this by acknowledging that I am a fan of dark humor. So I thought, why not turn the heroics of saving the poor burning wildlife into a little video game? Now again, I want to stress that this was meant with the best of intentions, and I had further plans to justify this project, but things fell through, which explains why this Let's Dev is coming out now instead of a few weeks ago. Anyway, the plan for today is to do just that. Create a game where the player saves koalas from the ever-burning wilderness. We'll not only create some randomly generated wildfires, but we'll also have the ability for players to find and save poor koalas from their fiery surroundings. So at the risk of accidentally sending the absolutely wrong message, let's get to the coding. To save time, I used our feature creep project as a base, but in hindsight it really didn't help at all. Anyway, first up were the trees. In the tree object, we need a burning state and a random height. Also a base variable to determine the tree's origin point. And we'd spawn the tree's body for however high the height variable determined it to be. And so far so good. Next, I wanted the leaves in the tree to also be randomly generated. So in the leaf object, it would choose a sprite and slightly reposition itself based on the chosen sprite. The leaves and the rest of the tree would then fade when the player was near for visibility purposes. A random amount of these trees with leaves at the tip would be spawned. The results were pretty great, giving our tree some nice variation in shapes and sizes. So with trees in a good place, I moved on to the player. The player sprite was added and their water tank created because players take control of course, a heroic fireman. And next up was the water hose tip, which would basically act as a gun. It would aim in the direction of the player's mouse and orbit around the player nuclear throne style. Now, to make sure players could find their way back, and also for immersion's sake, we needed to attach the hose tip to the water tank. The idea was to use a loop to have several of the hose's body sprite shift and move as one long tube. But my brain just wasn't warmed up enough for this, so I shelved the idea for now and moved on. A water projectile was added next, which works as a bullet would in any other project of ours featuring projectiles. So at the very least, we can now pretend we had a tube stuck to our source of infinite water that we can spray at any potential future fires. Moving on, an attempt was made to create an effect for trees that are hit with the water. By treating trees as enemies, we could use our usual hurt system to pull this off, including the lovely flash effect. All tree bodies and leaves were then tied together, so if one flashes, they would all flash. And not only that, but the tree would then also shake a bit. A keyword should, because long story short, I spent a huge amount of time trying to figure out why the leaves wouldn't flash like the rest of the tree. And no matter what I tried, it just wouldn't work, even if everything used the same exact code. So after spending about 30 minutes trying, I decided to move on to another failure, the water hose. Now that the old noggin was technically finally warmed up, I managed to eventually get a proper loop going for our hose body. Essentially, we took the hose tip and water tank positions and measured the distance between the two. Then we take the number and draw as many sprites as necessary to make up the distance, while also adding an angle to them so it wasn't just a straight line. This revised and more proper version would work, kind of. I actually ended up overthinking the whole thing a bit, and while it was great to have a curve in the body, it looked really weird. So a straight line it would remain. It's not as exciting as having a more realistic squiggly body, but it would have to do. So now that the hose was done, we could work on our poor flaming bears. Bears would spawn falling, burning, and ready to be put out. Again, much like the enemy, we use the same hurt check code here for the bears. Only instead of losing health, once the bear's burn counter reaches 0, it switches to a false burn state. In other words, the bear is no longer on fire. And finally, bears would be made to only fall for anywhere from half a second to a full second at a random rate of speed. Moving back to the tree, I gave it a chance to drop a bear from its tip whenever hit with water. In other words, saving burning bears from burning trees makes for a great gameplay incentive. And said bear can then be drenched in enough water to put them out, saving them from the unfortunate and fiery discomfort. And finally, using the code from our feature creep project, the ability to pick up extinguished bears was added. I then took a short break tweaking and adding some visuals to the game, including the fire object which would spread over time at random intervals. Also at this point, because I wasn't coding for optimization, we were knocking on FrameDrop's door, so effects like flashing and fading had to be turned off. Regardless, it was time to finish this thing, starting by going back to the bear code. So, any bears already extinguished that come in contact with fire would reset the bear to burning and replenish its burn counter, which yes, would require the player to re-extinguish the poor thing. Now, I know this sounds mean, but trust me, there's a purpose. Next up was the addition of the tent, which would serve as the drop-off point for any extinguished bears. See, I told you there was a purpose. So, any bears placed near the tent will be destroyed, and a nice little thank you heart will be spawned in its place. Because we didn't destroy that poor bear, we just sent it to the virtual veterinarian. That's the story and I'm sticking to it. This results in an incentive to try to save the wildlife from harm and not just do things halfway. And that's actually about it for the project. Just in time too, because reflecting on it, well really, this was a dark one. A lot darker than I intended. But I think in a way that kind of shows just how serious the situation in Australia it really is. I had originally planned to release this with a few more features for a small price, with all the money earned going directly to the Red Cross or some other organization, but I couldn't figure out how to actually set that up. So instead, I again implore you to donate if you have the means. And even if you're tight on cash, spreading the word and encouraging further support is also a great way to help. And finally, one final apology to anyone who may have found this project offensive. The intent wasn't malicious, it was simply an attempt to turn something terrible into something a little less terrible, to hopefully then help spread awareness. I honestly hope this one-off doesn't dissuade any of you from continuing to watch Let's Dev in the future. So with that said, we've come to the end of today's episode of Let's Dev, so be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on the project in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.